Hello and welcome to the David Kurten Show on today's News Talk TNT. Now, we have got an amazing show for you today. Gareth Ike is going to be here at 20 past the hour, and then Godfrey Bloom is going to join me coming up to the end of the show. So stay tuned for some amazing chats and conversations with some amazing people in this show. But as for what's happening in the news today, we have a little bit of good news for once, even though it is rather late in the day for this to be happening. So, a big report has just been released called the Cass report, and it's about transgenderism, and it's specifically criticizing the approach taken by the NHS towards gender affirming care for teenagers in the last 10 or so years, which has been the model which the NHS has used. Now, I could see that this was disastrous from the very beginning. I've been openly, publicly speaking about this for at least 7 years, and I was condemned and I was called a transphobe and all kinds of other names for doing so. But now, at last, we have an official report into this, and this goes along with some more good news that happened just recently in the NHS. England has actually now changed its approach, and it's dropped the gender affirming care route. Not that that is care, because what that actually means is if a child presents with gender dysphoria, everybody had to affirm what that child was saying. So a boy could say they were a girl, even though they're not a girl. Everyone pretended the boy was actually a girl, and vice versa, and then would start them on a course of puberty blockers so that they didn't develop naturally according to nature and God's design. And then after that, they would be given sex change hormones, which would do even more damage to the said boy or girl who is saying that they're the opposite gender, even though gender is not something that exists that's different to biological sex, but everybody has to pretend that it does, so that these children can be damaged. And every child that goes through that course will be sterilized. They will not be able to have children of their own. And then later on, of course, when they get to late teens, over 18, some cases even under 18, they've been given surgery, mutilation to remove their reproductive organs if they're male, or given breast binding treatment and hysterectomies and so on if they're female, again, further damaging their bodies for this ridiculous ideology, which was first made up by John Money in the 1950s. He was an American academic. He was a complete quack, and he did some very, very unethical experiments on children. A poor boy who was Jewish, who was circumcised, the circumcision went wrong. So Dr. Money's care for this boy was to try to do some experiments and create a fake vagina to try to bring up the boy as a girl. This boy then always thought that there was something wrong with him. He learned the truth about what had happened to him when he got to the age of 21, something like that, and then he promptly committed suicide. And then the whole work that John Money had done was completely discredited. The idea that there was something called gender that was different to biological sex. He tried it very unethically. It didn't work. But by the time that this had happened, other academics had taken up the cause, and then you've got this gender theory, gender critical theory, and had become mainstream in academia. And then it's become mainstreamed in society and gone throughout the education system and throughout the health system, not just in the UK, but throughout the Western world. And organizations like UNESCO and the World Health Organization are pushing this around the world onto African countries, Asian countries, South American countries, to make them as hellish in their health care for children with gender dysphoria as they have in the Western world. Now, of course, we have the about tens of thousands of children in the UK have been damaged by this. Thank goodness this report has come out, and now at least NHS England is not going to go down this route. NHS Wales, NHS Scotland, NHS Northern Ireland are run independently. So they still have to make their own decisions to stop gender affirming care, as it's called. We also still have the problem in schools, and this was something else that was highlighted in the CAS report. Parents should have the right to look at material in relationships and sex education, because there are all kinds of activists going into schools and inculcating children with gender ideology. And this has led to an explosion in rapid onset gender dysphoria, which was never something that was even a condition that had been heard of until about 10 years ago. There was gender dysphoria, but as we've had seen and from the results of another recent study in the Netherlands, which has been conducted for 15 years, the results also came out last week. Most teenagers, most people who present with gender dysphoria when they're teenagers get over it naturally by the time they reach young adulthood. 80% or more lose all symptoms of gender dysphoria. It's just a phase that they go through. Even better, there's already research from Professor Kenneth Zucker, who was the chief editor of the Archives of Sexual Behaviour and a professor in the University of Ontario, who did work on this subject 20 years ago and found that 98% of boys and 88% of girls get over gender dysphoria with some mild care and counselling from a professional counselor. This is clearly the scientific evidence now. We need to drop the whole idea of gender affirmation. And as I would say, the whole notion that there is something called gender that is different from biological sex in the first place. This is today's News Talk, TNT.
Connecting the dots, painting the bigger picture.
They always have great conversation.
Today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
You're watching the David Kurten Show on today's News Talk, TNT, and Gemma Cooper is with me to talk about the latest in the headlines in the UK. Welcome to the show, Gemma.
Thank you, David. And the biggest headline in the UK today is, of course, the CAS report. And the NHS has pledged to completely overhaul the way it treats children who are questioning their gender ideology, a complete radical overhaul, thanks to the 388-page report with its 32 recommendations of everything the NHS has been doing wrong. Scathing reports says there's no evidence for giving hormones or puberty-blocking drugs. It's been basically something of a scam, and children need mental health counselling before anything else, before they embark on this route, and nobody under the age of 25 should even be considered for any kind of transition whatsoever. So a really landmark report, much awaited, 4 years in the making, really shaking the foundations of the NHS treatment for children in this area.